In case you don't know who we are, at the end here we have at the end over here we have Kate Burke, who is an adoptee and who is president of the American Adoption Congress, and I'm sure you all know who she is. Next to me we have Mary Ivanek, who has come, I'm sure she came the farthest to come to this conference. I remember when I went to Australia how far that was, so I know how far you came. Mary Ivanek worked for a very long time and very hard in New Zealand on achieving open records, which has not been her only goal and has not been her only interest in this. And my name is Carol Anderson, and I'm Vice President of Concerned United Birth Parents, a former social worker and a current attorney, and no, I've never done adoptions. And never intend to. One of the things that we talked about in terms of activism is the difficulty that birth parents and adoptees have with personal issues that can interfere with their ability to be activists. This is no doubt true for adoptive parents as well, but their issues are issues that I understand less well. And in addition to that, I feel uncomfortable addressing them, at least in part because I think that when we start talking about open records, who is separated from their own relatives in their own families isn't the adoptive parents, it's the birth parents and the adoptees. And we know that while we really strongly need adoptive parents who care and who will work with us, it's the adoptees and the birth parents who are missing their family members and who are going to have to be the ones that do the most work in this. A lot of people have trouble coming out of a closet. That's true for adoptees and birth parents as well. So I started thinking about what's so good about a closet. Everybody in here is probably out of the closet or you wouldn't be here, and it can be awfully difficult to either look back and remember why you were there or why you stayed there, or for some people they never were. Remembering back to the beginning, for birth parents, obviously this starts with a pregnancy. Most of us were defined by what we were not. We were unmarried, the pregnancy was unplanned, we were financially unable. We were unaware of options, emotionally unprepared, and typically unsupported. Who we were was a whole series of uns, of inadequacies, of lacks. What we were most of all in the eyes of those around us was unworthy of our children. Shame on us. And society certainly did heap shame on us. After surrender, the closet looked good to a lot of birth parents, because who wants to remember or talk about or be identified with all those uns? Who wants to be defined in terms of everything you aren't? And why come out and endure all that shame and all that blame again when you're not going to get your baby back? After surrender, birth parents are keenly aware of society's view of them as unnatural, uncaring, and unhuman for giving away their children. How could any woman do that? That's what people say about prostitutes, too, and we're very well aware of that. And we're such monsters that we have to have sealed record laws to protect our children from us. That's not something that's designed to make us feel good about themselves. Knowing what other people think can make it hard for birth parents to stand up and say, I'm that person you're talking about. It's different for adoptees than it is for birth parents, but it doesn't mean it's easier. And in some ways, it's very definitely not. Once birth parents do decide that they're going to speak out and that they don't have to be an unperson anymore and that they can say that they're not, and they can say, look at who I am now, this is what all mothers can be, you don't have to stay young and helpless forever. Birth parents very often have a great deal of energy to put into the movement. And I've heard many birth mothers say, and I've certainly said myself, all that energy, all that love, all that caring and concern that I wanted to put into my son, I'll put into the movement. It's not quite that way for adoptees, and I think that they face some different issues than birth parents do on coming out. Adoptees have lost their entire families, usually before they knew any of them but their mothers. They've lost the mothers they were bonded to during the long months that they were nurtured in the womb. But those losses happened so early in their lives that they didn't have concepts or words for them at the time. Adoptees are taught to think that they have gained from adoption. They've gained the only life they know, the only family that they know. And that baby whose own family and mother disappeared is inside every adoptee, hurt and scared about losing their families again. Adoptees are raised by people who only gained from adoption. They may have lost through infertility, but adoption was pure gain. And it's hard for adoptive parents to see that adoption is not all gains for adoptees. Adoptees also have to face a societal view, which is shared by some adoptive parents and even by some birth parents, that adoptees should be grateful to their adoptive parents. They should be grateful for having been adopted. If they talk about what's wrong with adoption, or if they talk about their losses, they're seen as ungrateful, and they're seen as betraying their adoptive parents. Well, being ungrateful suddenly means they've got an experience of identification, because now they're being identified with the uns, like their birth parents. Those unknown, unhuman birth parents, the unparents. Outsiders often see adoptees who talk about loss as a betrayal or a rejection of the adoptive family. The adoptee can get sidetracked into defending, no, this isn't rejection of my adoptive family, it's something else, and it becomes very difficult for them to deal with some of these issues. Most of us, birth parents or adoptees, did not have a choice about adoption separation years ago. But we have choices now. We can choose a different view of our experiences. We don't have to believe what we've been taught. Now that we know the truth of our situation, we have to speak it, even if we're reluctant to do it. That can be tough because most of us don't need open records for ourselves. We have found our children, or as adoptees have found families, despite those sealed records. When finding each other and being reunited doesn't give us back what we lost, what are open records going to do for us, and why should we be fighting for them? The biggest reason that we should be doing that is for gaining back control of our lives, for recovering that pride in ourselves, or developing pride in ourselves, maybe for the first time. Why not show them they were wrong on what they did in the first place? And the only way we're going to do that is if we speak out. The only way we're going to really take control of our lives is if we change society's view of us, of our children, of adoption, of families, and we can't do that unless we take action. If we're going to take action, we have to understand what our issues are well enough that we know what we're capable of doing and what we're not capable of doing. And if you're not capable right this very moment today of walking up to a legislator and talking to him, then don't. But there may be some smaller step that you can take or something else that you can do that's important for you now and that is going to advance your cause. I urge people in taking steps to work together to do it, because what we absolutely don't need is to be working at cross purposes and to be sabotaging one another's efforts with the best of intentions. Good intentions in this realm are not enough. They count and they're important and we have to have them, but they are not enough. And if you go off on your own, or some group goes off sometimes on its own, without working with the other groups that are going to be important on that legislation, without working together, without trying to form as much of a team and a united front and a consistent response as you can, you're going to make it very, very difficult to get anywhere, and you may undermine months of effort by other people. I'd like to pass this along to Kate, is going to talk about adoptees in this.
With all those uns, I think we should probably make 7-Up our movement drink, huh? Pass them out. It made me thirsty, actually. I've noticed, and this is one of those blanket statements that will always get me in trouble because there are exceptions, that the people who stick around in our movement generally and make the most noise and work the hardest are birth parents. And as an adoptee, I find this very frustrating at times, and I've really tried to look at the factor, why are adoptees, and again, generalization, but you find adoptees being good searchers, kind of sneaking around, skulking around. And it's an issue we really must address. I am an adoptee, and I remember thinking, boy, is this going to hurt my adoptive parents? Is this going to hurt my birth mother? I never thought if it would hurt me, which I thought was a real interesting concept. The evolution that I went through is I finally just got real mad, and I thought, I deserve to speak out. I deserve some respect, and I deserve to be an adult. And as adoptees, we've got to grow up. Society likes to keep us children. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been called a child in the last few years, and as much as the bags under my eyes might like that, I'm not. And so I had to quit buying that act, and I think that's another thing, aside from what Carol was saying, that we as adoptees must do. We're adults. Did we ask our adoptive parents, it's not 7-Up, I don't know. Did we ask our adoptive parents if we could marry who we wanted to marry? Did we get their approval on the breed of dog we wanted to buy? Do we get their approval on every piece of clothing that we wear? Do we get our parents' approval and tell them how grateful we are with every life decision we make? I sure hope not, and I doubt it. But in this one issue that is so important to us and that affects us more than anything else in the world and is so healing and positive for us, we have to sneak around. We're afraid to stand up and say, look, I think you're great, I love you, but this is for me. Search is truly, in my opinion, the first really selfish act, and a good selfish act, that an adoptee makes. But we must move beyond that good selfish act and integrate it into making ourselves feel empowered and realizing that we are adults and there are things that we will disagree with our birth parents and with our adoptive parents, and that we are entitled to our feelings and our opinion. And we must get over that as a group of adoptees. I mean, thank God we have birth parents who have, at the March to Washington, was just flabbergasted me. We had way over half of the attendees were birth parents. And a couple of adoptees with sunglasses. I mean, we must, as adoptees, address this. We have got to quit worrying about who's going to get hurt. And think about maybe we're getting hurt. And make ourselves strong. And how you do that through your search and support groups, through just dealing with the issue and understanding that we're all grown up here. And not until we are all grown up will we be able to affect the change. Not until adoption, for all of us, all members of the triad, is not a secret, is not shameful, that these issues are out on the table. So we all need to come out of the closet. Adoptees, it concerns me. We've got to find a way within ourselves to become strong, to say to our adoptive parents, you know what, I love you, but I'm going to speak out, I'm going to be active. And if this makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but I need to do this for me, and I need to do it for a whole lot of other people. We have to find it in ourselves to do that. Being an activist can be done on many levels. It's not all picket signs or Open My Records Day. You can be an activist by starting an education program in your own community. You can be an activist by talking to unwed mothers in an unwed mother home in the city or place you live. You can become an activist on many levels. You can become an educational activist. You can become a legislative activist. And we need to be active on all those labels, on those levels. We must, there's so much work that has to be done. I mean, I used to think 2 years ago that this would not be such a big deal. We'd done our homework for 15 years. We had it made in the shade. And then in talking to agency workers who were for open records, I discovered that we had never thrown in the term retroactive. It's an interesting experience. Yeah, I'm for open records. Oh, you mean retroactively? Oh, well, wait a minute here. You know, we need to go back and start educating about that. So education is indeed hand in glove with activism. So there is a place for you. There is a place for you. If you don't choose to do legislation, get involved in educational things. But get involved. We are not so big. That's the other thing. I like to think we're hundreds of millions of people. There's not that many of us. We can't afford to have one person not doing something. Something. We're a small minority of this country. And every person in a certain, Mary talked about, and she will address it, but something that I think is a fabulous idea is the two-tiered search and support group meeting, where for the first part of the group, you talk about search and support and whatever you do normally, and then you take a coffee break and you come back into what are we doing actively for outreach for legislation, how can we do this, and you plan it, and you work together on it. And that way also, people who are just coming in are given this forum. They're realizing the culpability right off the bat. Yes, you can search, you can get your support, but here we've got a letter writing campaign to this agency that won't even give non-identifying. Or here we have this or that, whatever your community, you deem in your community needs to be done. And the activism that the AAC is talking about must start right there. Must start with that first phone call to a search and support group. Must start with making that entry-level person realize how important they are. We have lost way too many people in this movement. Way too many people, because we haven't been thinking in this mode, the search and run syndrome. And we must find a way to get those entry-level people involved, because once you get involved, your friends, your life, not your whole life, but you have friends in the movement. You have a reason to be there. You're comfortable. It's a family. But we must find a way to create that on the very bottom level, so that that culpability, that responsibility to pay back or to affect change is there. Mary?
I think I'll start off where you left off in terms of the real importance of splitting our groups and make sure we address all aspects, because we have to treat the whole. You know, we're not split off. We're already split off from families and things. And if we use the ways for changing and split off things too, it takes longer to get the whole together. And I think if we believe that, you know, working together by actually being actively involved in both and having it at the same meeting, you're more likely to get more people. And you see, once people get caught up, they feel very empowered. And it's not just a skill they can use with adoption. The skills they use in adoption support groups for getting change are equally useful to people in dealing with their local city councils, on town planning things, on parent-pupil associations. I don't know if you have these sort of school committees. I mean, these are life skills which enhance your functioning in a whole broad range of your daily life, not just the area of adoption. And once people sort of realize that, you know, I can actually write a letter, or I am actually able to stand up and speak my mind, and it just sort of build up your self-esteem and things you can use in other areas. If you know, particularly if you start using a framework, I think, of how you do things, you can do some lateral thinking and apply that kind of approaches in other things, just the same. So it actually builds your life and enrich your lives in the other part as well, not just on your adoption issue. And once people start making those connections, it just makes you more the more you function fully on all sorts of levels, the more satisfying your life is going to be. I mean, you can participate at different levels. And I think then it helps you to have diversion. I think to be able to, for myself, to have been able to evolve in activism for this long, I needed diversion. And as Carol said, there are other things I do as well. I don't make all my life adoption because it becomes very insular. So my other kind of interest, and they do come together, they're congruent, like I've been involved with setting up community houses in my own residence borough where I live, because we didn't have one. We didn't have a childcare centre. We didn't have a citizens advice bureau. I mean, these things all fit in, but it's a different focus. In terms of learning political things, what I used in the adoption law reform way of political action, I used form part of a residents group fighting council on town planning issues, and 10 years later finished on being a councillor, which I've just given away for 3 years, and things like being chairperson of a town planning committee in a borough council, when you're talking about drainage and housing and sewerage and water supply. It's very basic. It's a total diversion of some of the other things, and they balance each other out. And I think sometimes it's good to diversify, and it keeps your perspective and you keep your energy up, I think. Sounds like a lot of work, but it doesn't if it all fits in and is congruent, and it keeps the balance. So that's how I keep my energy up, by doing totally something different. Yeah. I used to do spinning, but I haven't got time these days. Yeah. In terms of, can I just ask how many social workers are here, or agency workers? One. That is very representative of what it was like for me when I joined the activism. 2. You got 2. All right. Well, I'm pleased to hear it. But I mean, this is actually what it's like for a social worker, work for activism in a group where you're so much the minority. I sort of really feel like we have to build bridges and coalitions as activists, because we do need each other. We all have a separate role, but together we can work together. And that means sometimes overcoming your anger towards a system. It also means for social workers to acknowledge that you have to give away your power, and that clients know better than you, and just change your whole focus of working. Activism for change can be small, and it all builds up. From a social worker's point of view, I think that there are limitations, as each birth parents has limitations and adoptive people have limitations, like you double bind with your adoptive parents and other sort of issues. For social workers, there are limitations because of agency boundaries. It is also risk involved. I can remember having to sort of account for every case I was involved with, because 3 times I was called to account at my head office saying, we've had a complaint of adoptive parents about their child searching. This child is now 34 or something, wrote to the agency for information because they didn't have anything, and now they've made contact. What did you tell them? You know, how did they manage to find this out? You must have broken confidentiality and so on. So you've got to be really careful to account for how you work and not break the rules. I mean, I had my personal boundary. I would say to people in the group, I will not be able to give you a name, you know, and I won't give you a name. And that has to be respected too. there are other ways you can. So it's trying to find out what you can and can't do, and that also accept that each have limitations because of other concerns. I've been talking so much this morning, I'm just now trying to think. What else? Maybe we should ask questions, I think.
I'd like to know how you identified the people who supported you in the feeling and why they did so. Who was the enemy and why? What was their motivation?
Repeat the question.
Who supported the change and who were the enemies? All right. We tried to get coalitions, and the way we did that was by looking at our networks. You know, we would set people down in groups and now, who do you know who has influence on what or access to certain people? And certainly we actively promoted support from churches, you know, because adoption being a moral issue, if the churches were supporting it, you know, that was helpful for parliamentarians. And in the movement originally, very few professionals got involved, but some of the voluntary church agencies did. And Keith Griffin, who was a Methodist minister and an adoptee, made sure he got onto the Public Questions Committee of the Presbyterian and Methodist Church. So that's a very powerful Public Questions Committee which responds to issues of public concern of the church. So get yourself into these kind of organizations. You can get a support, etc., and then they will speak out on as well. So that was one coalition. The Catholic Church, because Catholic Social Services in Christ, is quite interesting because of Keith's contact with Methodist. In Christchurch, this is another city on the South Island, and being on this Public Questions Committee, he visited their social services. And he encouraged the social worker in Christchurch to start an adoption support group by putting a little ad in the personal columns. If you are adopted or a birth mother, maybe you would like to get together and talk about your concerns. Very simple. He facilitated that, and after a year he left, and he approached the Catholic Social Services staff who were quite involved with adoption. And there was one director who was quite an open, she was the only woman director of Catholic Social Services, being a lay person. And he said, well, I'm leaving the job, the agency isn't appointing anybody, would you take up working with the support group? And they really got involved and sort of got educated. They then became very supportive. So and they became involved in the process. They then put these messages across onto their hierarchy. They made submissions to the select committee, and they made coalitions with other Catholic social service agencies in the other main cities, and they all started to have open adoption practice, working for open records. When they made submission, the chairman of the committee said, does your bishops know that you are here? You must be just one of these trendy lefty social workers who come up with these ideas. And I want evidence that your bishops are supporting you from the church in what you're doing. And because they have kept their diocese informed of what they're doing over quite a number of periods of time, the focus of the church in New Zealand is more on social justice issues, and churches are getting involved in social justice issues quite a bit. And the bishop had a conference, and the cardinal put a vote to all the bishops up the country there, and it was unanimously endorsed. So they send a letter to the select committee that the bishops and the cardinal of New Zealand are unanimously endorsing our agency's policy and submission. So, you know, that was a very important coalition, because when you have people saying open records promote abortion, and the Catholics are saying no, it's not, powerful. So, you know, these are coalitions you have to work on. For myself as a social worker, I start building up support within the agency. I offered to run a seminar on adoption for adoption workers and draw in consumers. I made sure I got on the executive committee of the National Social Workers Association and then educated them at level, and that supported me, because as my agencies were challenging me, I had the support of my professional body. So they better not dismiss me too easily because, so you have to build your coalitions. Very important. Because there are costs, involved in it. I was personally denied promotion twice. And I only got it because I challenged the system and appealed, because we have specific guidelines for civil servants. And as a result of my first challenging, it was discovered they had just such discrimination that the whole system of appointing staff in the whole of the department changed after having exposed what had happened. So, by only challenging, and some of my colleagues helped me pay for the appeal, which took 3 full days. So, you have to build your coalition so when you're under threat, you can draw on them for support, and that is right across. So these are just things, but you have to take risks. There's no growth without risks, but have it as a planned risk to minimize and anticipate the possible consequences. So when you get hit with it, you're prepared for it, it doesn't hurt you that much, and you've already got some counterattack ready if you need it. So coalitions, sometimes the Baptist Church supported us, believe it or not, because one of their top moderators had been, now his mother was a birth mother, and he never knew till she died on her deathbed that she'd had the secret and pain all her life, and he was floored. And so, you have the most unlikely coalitions creeping out of the woodwork. And also, you actually have to personally approach people in power. They find, you have, philanthropic people who will support you if you go and ask them. We've just had our conference, for instance, in New Zealand. We were able, inter-country adoption is not allowed in New Zealand, but there is a push of the infertile people and infertility societies to bring it in. To counteract that at our conference, we were able to get the Secretary General of International Social Services from Geneva. We brought an adult Korean woman from New York out and another person from Australia. We went and approached one of the richest men in New Zealand and say, we know gives money to foundations, give you some money. He gave us money, we paid for their fares. There are people who will support you, but you actually have to go out and ask. So, building coalitions is so important. I think I'll leave it there.
One of the questions, though, I think you did a fine job on talking about building coalitions and on support.
Just keep going.
But what's happening is that there's a concern with who was the opposition and who worked at that, who worked at opposing you. I know who worked at opposing us were adoptive parent groups and the infertility groups.
My mind is so full this morning that I lose track of the question, so thanks for reminding me. Who opposed us was elderly male politicians and elderly male lawyers and judges who were adoptive parents. That is a fact. This is publicly stated in Parliament. I have looked through, part of my thesis, I had access to the person who promoted the bill, and he had over 8,500 pieces of paper and letters and everything else. And if you looked at the kind of people who opposed it, there were very few opposing it, but those who did were very powerful. If you got your Prime Minister, your Deputy Leader, your Leader of the House, your Minister of Justice, and your Minister of Social Welfare, boy, you got it. And on top of that, you had some very powerful judges, and I wasn't aware of that till I had access to the personal papers, where a chief High Court judge wrote person to person to the Prime Minister, Minister of Justice, who then sent copies to Mr. Hunt when I then saw them, who's saying, look, I am an adoptive parent of 4 children. Because of my position, I can't possibly appear in a select committee because that will expose my children and they will get questioned at school. But I just want you to know what they are proposing is not on. And I want you to blah, 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 blah. And you would never know. You can't challenge them in public. They use very underhand, sort of informal networks. And these are the ones you can't fight because you don't know about them until they leaked, you know. And there were several judges who were adoptive parents who would use their personal power and connectiveness with those men in power, which you as a activist don't know about and you can't fight because it's confidential correspondence. I mean, they tell me about it afterwards, so I can't do anything about it. But just be aware. So what you need to do as part of is to make sure you get some very powerful people on your side. And we had a very wealthy man whose son was part Maori and desperately needed to know. And we in the group found his birth family before the act was passed, and he was forever grateful. And he's been wonderful supportive and also have given us regular money for conferences or whatever when we've asked for it, and make sure that he writes. You know, we had a retired professor of law who had written law books on it. We made sure he wrote personal letters. And these you have to foster. But you don't know about it. We had a very top gynecologist and obstetrician, you know, and I saw this letter, and you can't use it in public. And he's saying, over my 30 years as working with these women, I have seen thousands of birth mothers, 90% who are mentally disturbed, and most of the offspring are likely to be the same. So the more we can place them in adoptive families, the better. Now, how can, you know, this is a co-founder of the pro-life movement, and you can't challenge them because you don't know that that's what they're saying behind the scenes. So these are the opposition, and, you know, how do you organize? But they are the minority, and the truth ultimately must win, you know. Well, you can't.
No, you can't. One of the things that we found that was real help finding, I should say found like we've done it, but I mean found in California, is that we really did our homework on the people we were going to be dealing with as much as possible. So we have 80 sets of 80 adoptive parents in the California, 80? That sounds like awfully high. Maybe, well anyway, a large number of adoptive parents in our legislature. And so we identified them and got their feelings on this whole subject before we went much further. We are a network of searchers in this movement, so my feeling is let's use that in another positive way, you know, as searchers, and let's do homework on these people so that you know what you're dealing with. I mean, so that as much as possible, you're going to get the person stabbing you in the back, but let's find out, let's see if we can know who we don't turn our back on before we walk in the room.
Mary, when you said that in Michigan got some support from some of the churches,
Mm-hmm.
that's good over there. Over here, I see it as not much of a prospect because my understanding of the churches here in the United States, most of them are very much against open records practice.
That didn't happen overnight. I have a very good 6-page article on how to argue with religious groups. You know, just in terms of like, you have to use the language for different groups of people. And when you deal with church people, you keep talking about openness and honesty and truthfulness and compassion and humanness. And, you know, in my contract with the Parliament of New South Wales last year, they came to New Zealand to hear submissions on how our bill went, and they asked me to meet with them, and I did. And they asked me to work with them as a consultant for 3 months while they were doing the report and things. And one of their opposition was from fundamentalist Christian Union combined church groups. And 2 of the members on the committee were independent in Parliament from these church groups. And they were totally opposed to it. He'd been opposed to it. And he said, well, in the end, he was convinced that he was going to support this committee. But then he was concerned about his congregation, who had put him in Parliament. He's saying, God, if I'm going to change my mind, what are the repercussions? I'll lose my seat. So I went over to Sydney, and he asked me to meet with this group. And I sat in one room with 98 women from a fundamentalist Christian background. I mean, that's fine. There is a variety of people with different views. But this particular group was extremely fanatic. So it was, yeah, I mean, I had a 2.5-hour meeting, but most of them agreed at the end, which was really surprising. And I must say I asked them not to keep the tape afterwards. I felt rather sick about the way I kept reinforcing the language, but you have to. And, you know, say, pardon? Well, like, for instance, I'm just trying to remember. I was very lucky. I came earlier, and they had this whole day seminar, and they had invited the Minister of Education or a representative to talk about sex education in schools, and they were opposed to it because they wanted the right to withdraw their children, and the school made it compulsory, etc., etc., etc. And so I was a bit early, and I sat at the back of this audience for about 15 minutes. And that was the best thing I could have done, because it gave me an idea as to where people were at, you know. And that's as a sideline, that's what I use at a select committee. Whenever I appear, I always ask to be heard last or second to last on the schedule, and I sit through all the others, and then I know exactly what questions being asked, which keep coming up, what hobby horses particular MPs have, and what they're trying to turn around. So by the time it comes to my turn, I know exactly how to handle. I mean, that's a strategy I use. So in this particular, you know, like the church thing, I use things like, I use Carol's writing a bit. She writes wonderful thing on language, on closed abortion promotes adoption, what was it? Closed records promotes abortion. And then I would say to this woman, you know, as women, we are all women here, I would say. And I was introduced by being told that I was from New Zealand. I was married for 25 years to the same man. I didn't... I came from an originally Dutch Reform background and immigrated to New Zealand at age 16. And this was the chairman of the committee strategy to introduce me. And I was saying, well, you know, I really sympathize with adoptive parents because I'm personally married 25 years. I'm involuntary childless. I can understand how they're feeling, but nevertheless, I don't really have the right to inflict pain on others, because that would be a very unchristian thing to do. You know, there's this kind of, this is true, it's true. I don't feel bad, it's just on how you use it, but I think it's still the truth. When we're talking about, you know, Christian philosophy promotes honesty, it promotes openness. We're supposed to be humane. And if we look what happens, can we really say we are humane when we split a mother and child? And then I would say, you know, I was orphaned. I know what it's like not to be with your mother. I couldn't inflict that on another child. So I actually promote families staying together, sanctity of the family to keep them together. I mean, you use this kind of language, you know. And it's true. I mean, it's not being dishonest, but it's how you use it. I will not be dishonest. I mean, you know, I mean, because they'll catch you out. But it's a matter of how to use it. And I use Carol's writing a lot. I just find it spot on.
I was wondering, I don't know, I just sort of gotten into this, and what is our policy in terms of national legislation? I've heard of Alma challenging court cases. I mean, just in a broad view, what is the political course for this group that we want to promote? And I don't.
I think I better answer that. You want to answer it as a lawyer? No? All right, thanks. We've just developed a legislative plan. The feeling is, not the feeling, the truth is this must be done on a state-by-state basis. And each state must decide for themselves where they are. So we have, I said earlier today, we've made less regions, and we're going to be developing state representatives who will form just such coalitions in each state, so that each state can identify whether they're ready for legislation. They may not be. They still may be heavy duty on educational stuff and beginning, you know, and the game plan of doing that coalition. Some states might be ready for legislation, other states might be ready to start feeling out their legislators, but it must be a state-by-state matter. somebody brought up federal legislation yesterday, and I think that that might be a bit unwieldy. I also think it might be impossible. However, if we can get 30 or 40 states to turn, perhaps a legislator would be a little more, a national legislator might be a little more interested in doing it. Litigation is brought up frequently, and I used to think that was a wonderful idea. I'm a little nervous about it now. If we get a case to the Supreme Court and we lose, we've set ourselves back mucho. I mean, it certainly sounds like the easiest, but what I'm discovering is easiest is not necessarily the best if you fail. So it's just the state by state. Pardon me? Because then a precedent has been set with the privacy issue, which is a big bugaboo with adoption records. And if the Supreme Court finds that adoption and the birth mother's retroactive privacy, perceived wanting of that or needing of that, is more important than that of the adoptee, and a lot of legal opinion goes in that, in that line. Carol, you can talk to it. Legislators will say, well, wait a minute, it's on, the Supreme Court has found.
This is something we've talked about for years. People need to understand what law can do and what it can't do, and you need to understand what you're dealing with here. I have heard, particularly adoptees, but birth parents too, talk about the adoption contract.